Hi, this is Alan Dorfman. I am one of the principals of Super Impulse.
So Alan, talk about, you guys announced a lot of new partnerships last week, and talk a little about some of the stuff that you're getting into that we can see in the next coming months.
A lot going on. Well, our primary business is miniatures, licensed miniatures, usually functional, but not always. There's a bunch of collectible. So over the past few weeks, we introduced a new product called Minis and Minis, and the first iteration of that is Sugar Buzz. So it's all candy properties. And we're taking minis and we're basically bringing them to a new, let's say, smaller, lower level, where each little package of candy, it's not candy, it looks like candy, the little minis is similar to what you've seen other miniatures look like in the market, but inside are little tinies. So if you get a little toxic waste barrel, and inside there's going to be 2, 3, or 4 miniatures toxic waste. So we have all we have not all, but we have a lot of trending candy brands. So those are actually hitting shelf now. And that's a category that will be expanding pretty regularly over the course of at least the next year, or probably longer than that, with other candy titles, with some breakfast product titles, and some other consumer products. So it's taken the miniatures business in a whole new place. We are also doing a collaboration with Hasbro with co-branded Mr. Potato Head and a line called Pop Taters. So we're very excited about that. So Pop Taters are a Mr. Potato Head body, but the body parts are co-branded with popular, let's call it contemporary cultural figures, including Garbage Pail Kids, Bob Ross, of course, Transformers, so we have Optimus Prime on deck coming out soon. We're working with Kiss, so we have a Gene Simmons and his demon persona as a potato head. And then that's the first wave. And then coming soon afterwards, we're doing Sonic, which he looks a little interesting because Sonic is such a nice slim character, but as a potato, he's a little more...
it looks like a potato.
He looks like a potato Sonic. We are doing Dwight from The Office, the dude from Big Lebowski. We have got Chucky from the horror films coming down the road. And then there's a whole new slew on deck for the back half of 2023.
Now that's a lot of IP from multiple different IP owners. How do those relationships start? And can you give an example of was this something people that came to you with the idea? Did you come to them? How does that work?
In fact, the reason we are partnering with Hasbro is that Hasbro identified us as a company that has the relationships and has the know-how to get the co-branded license. So it started with Hasbro offering us the opportunity and asking us to think about it and give them a proposal, which we've done. And we leveraged long-term relationships and some new relationships that we've had. We have been doing a product line for the past probably 18 months now that we call microfigs, which are 1.25 inch articulate figures. And we have a pretty broad range of characters on that. And through that product line, we've established relationships with Universal Studios and with Nickelodeon and Viacom Studios. We do a little bit of work with Sony. We do a little bit of work with Warner Brothers. In addition to working with other toy companies, Hasbro included, Mattel with Masters of the Universe and Barbie. So those are relationships really were existing. And then once we get rolling and we have a story to tell, it makes it much easier to get doors open with other potential licensors.
Now, it's interesting because I have talked to other companies before about how licensing works with them specifically. And I know Hasbro has a lot of exclusivity with certain figures and certain sizes, like with Marvel and Star Wars. And is it because you make stuff on a smaller scale that they're like to work with you more, or are more open to a collaboration, or more open to licensing their RP just because they are just really small cutesy versions of things that already existed?
It depends on the license. Everybody's restrictions are different. It's funny because we'll have more leeway with Hasbro on their brands like Power Rangers and Transformers or G.I. Joe. If we wanted to do one of their licenses, which would be Star Wars or Marvel characters, we would have restrictions on. So depends who and what the current deal is. Hasbro wouldn't see us as a competitor for Transformers in 1.25 inch scale, but they might see us as a competitor for Star Wars in 1.25 inch scale.
Yeah, that is interesting how how when you're allowed to make something, limited run games, for example, they have to bundle a game with something else and it can't be a figure, it has to be a statue. because if they do a
Yeah.
figure, like it goes into a different type of licensing, like merchandising or another type instead of video games. And then there's a whole other slew of legalities and lawyers and contracts. I just find the whole, because in 2022, like I think IP is so much more valuable than it was 50 years ago. Like people will, you know, if you own a certain IP like Barbie or Hot Wheels, like that's a big IP to have, you know, like, and you'll license it out. What are some of the big challenges when you're making your product specifically? And you can just pick any IP that you're allowed to talk about, that when you're transitioning, because your stuff is really tiny. Your stuff is tiny. That's kind of your gimmick.
Yeah, and that's our claim to fame. So when we look at a property or we look at a toy in particular, Hot Wheels is a very good example. We really look at it from a perspective as, you know, what is it that a consumer, an end user is going to want out of Hot Wheels? What do they expect out of Hot Wheels? And we make it our objective to deliver that. So if, you know, you're looking at Hot Wheels, their styling and their you know, the type of metallic paint they use, and of course, you know, wheels that turn and a vehicle that moves. Those are all what you want out of a Hot Wheels, and that's our job to make it that small. And if we can't deliver that, then we're not really doing what our customer would expect. And honestly, it's a lot of times harder to make something small. I mean, Hot Wheels to start with are small. You only have a 3-inch toy, so we're cutting that down to, you know, less than half of its original size. It's harder. It's harder to paint. It's harder to mold. It's harder to assemble. So you know, there are definitely challenges. It's and plus we don't have the economy scale of the huge volume that Mattel would sell worldwide of Hot Wheels. So, you know, for us to go ahead and capture all those features, but with less, you know, scale of economy, meaning we're not building millions, but we still have to put out a price point that's competitive. It's a challenge.
No, like over the last decade or so, we've seen toy photography and action figure photography kind of like get really popular, especially on social media platform. When you guys are designing a new product, do you reach out to some photographers? Do you like that do toys specifically? Do you research to see what maybe is missing in that market in terms of like dioramas for people who are doing this type of photography and entertainment? Then say, there's no Connect 4 at this scale. We should make one at this scale, because then you could put it with, like, you know, on your website. The Ninja Turtles could play it, like that kind of stuff.
That's a great question. And no, that was a very happy byproduct of what we do. We kind of found out as social media continued to grow, that photographers were using our products as basically as toys for their toys. So mini action figures or as props for their diorama sets. So now we do have a base of those who are known to us, and there's more coming to us all the time. So we do our best to either provide them with samples, provide them information of when product will be available.
So your minis and minis line, like you mentioned it before, like, are these just replicas? Is there actual candy in these things, or is it just little mini replicas?
Oh, they're mini replicas. Yeah, we don't do any consumable product. In fact, we all the candy we're doing, we make sure we present it in packaged versions so that we don't have anybody, particularly little kids, thinking that they're real candy and trying to eat them.
Yeah, I mean, because like we mentioned before, it's interesting. Like if you wanted to get into that industry, it's a whole separate slew of contracts and legalities and processes.
We're toy guys. Yeah, we'll stay in our lane.
Was there anything particular that was really fun to work on in the Sugar Buzz line for the minis and minis? Anything like you mentioned the Toxic Waste Bros? Anything like?
They've been great. So I gotta say they've been really hands-on and very responsive. They're a little new to licensing, so at times we had to kind of give them a little bit of an education on what the process is. They were a little bit too hands-on. I'm trying to put this politely, but they've been very good and very enthusiastic to work with. But currently under development, we're the whole next series will be based on Hershey brands. So that's Hershey bars and Hershey Kisses and Reese's, and they have a number of brands that are under the Hershey banner. And that's a really interesting product line and a very interesting company to work with. So that's coming along nicely. They have a lot more under their umbrella than I ever knew.
Is it hard having such a plethora of intellectual property for all different ranges and audiences? Because like some of your stuff, like you range from like the pop culture stuff like Rick and Morty to really obscure stuff like Richard Simmons. Like it's two different audiences, but it seems like you multiply that by like 50 because there's so many different brands people recognize. so many different audiences that are attracted to specific things. Like, is that a challenge for you and your company to make sure that everyone's getting what they want?
Our challenge is controlling ourselves. We have a lot of opportunity for a lot of different type of brands. So we sometimes we find it hard to resist, but you never know. And that's the beauty of the collectible business and the toy business and just, you know, the world we live in today is that you don't know what's going to take off. One of our best sellers, we're doing it as a pop tater, and we're doing it. It was one of our first microfigs. Is Bob Ross. I mean, who saw that coming? So you take your chances, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they're very small niche audiences. We hope for the best and take what we ever get, whatever comes of it.
Now, I know like you can't talk, like a lot of these negotiations happen behind closed doors. You're not allowed to talk about it. But if for the ones that you are, was there any particular IP or toy that you didn't think you'd get and then you ended up getting like last minute, or any fun stories behind stuff like that?
I'll tell you one we're working on. It wasn't hard to get. It was actually a pleasure to get, but it was a lot of fun to negotiate. We will be doing in 2023 microfigs and pop tater versions of Jay and Silent Bob. And the negotiation was essentially myself through text messages to our person, one of our agents, dealing with Kevin Smith's agent, who was talking with Kevin. So essentially, it was a third-party conversation, and it went very quick, and it made it real easy when we found out that he was he had owned some of our product, particularly our Masters of the Universe product. So he sent an image of his toy, and it made things go a lot faster. He knew us, he knew the product, and he's way into getting our product represented and with his brand and our line.
So Alan, blind boxes have become more and more popular over this last decade or so. As a company, like, where do you see blind boxes moving forward? Do you think you'll eventually keep doing blind boxes, do more of them, do less of them? Like, just as a whole, like, what are your views on that?
Yeah, blind boxes are a really significant part of our business, and we will continue to grow in that space. We started with 4 or 5 years ago. One of our larger customers asked us to blind box an assortment of world's smallest toys, and we did that, and it was extremely successful. In fact, our world's smallest blind box, we're up to Series 7, I believe. It's become one of our top sellers. In fact, I think it was our #1 seller. And that put us into the blind box space, and the next big entry we had was Wacky Package Minis, which were 3D versions of the Wacky Package stickers that have been around since the 70s. We did that so we can put out a collectibles that was in the miniature space, but more geared towards boys. And we found out that boys, girls, moms, dads, adults, everybody, it was a pretty big hit for us, and everybody was buying it. So we've been doing it we have Micro Toy Box, which is all classic toys as collectible minis, and blind box. We're doing the minis and minis with candy and the breakfast foods coming up. And then we're actually going to put together a range of our microfigures as a blind box collectible as well. That'll also be out for spring of 2023.
Now, some of your stuff, I mean, is officially licensed, and some of it's also parody. Like, is it difficult to do a parody, like when it's going through legal, to make sure that you're allowed to use it? And if it looks too similar to what the real thing is? Because I forget, the last time I checked, the parody wrote was like it was a weird 35% different, and I don't know how that means. I don't know if that's still the same way. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, we try not to burn any bridges, because we are working with a lot of companies out there, so we try to be respectful of their space, but at the same time, we try to put out there that stuff that people are looking for and people want. So it's a fine line that I think we do a pretty good job of staying on the right side of it.
And then where can people pick up your products? Like, where can we see them? Like where can people buy them online and stores? Because I mean, I want to say Toys R Us, but that's a thing of the past so far. Maybe might come back. Who knows? But where can people find your products?
Toys R Us in Canada, you can still find them. We are really pretty broadly distributed, so you can find it from independently owned toy stores all over the United States, up through what we call the big boxes. So Walmart carries some of our product, Target carries some of our product, Meijer Midwest is a big customer, Big Lots covers our stuff, We're in Walgreens. We have some product in CVS, but FYE, Urban Outfitters, all basically the trend chains. So you can find our stuff. And then we do have a world's smallest shop on Amazon. So it's not hard to find.
One thing I realized when I went to Toy Fair for the first time in 2019, and one thing I never realized, I never even thought about it until I was just hearing about it in meetings and casual conversation, is retail shelf space has become an issue these last couple of years. With your product being so small, does that mean that you have more viable partners in retail stores because you're not taking up a Lego thing this big on a shelf that's $500? Do you have a little display stand on a counter? Like, does it make it easier for your products to be distributed that way?
Yes and no. The blind box stuff does get check lane and counter space, but we have, our product line has grown so much that for the smaller type of stores, the specialty stores, we have a floor standing spinner rack that holds a larger variety of it because we've kind of outgrown our wall space. Retail shelf space and retail placement is always a challenge, and of course everybody's vying for the same space. So we try to offer as many options for merchandising as we can. And
then where can people find out more about your products and what's coming next for you guys? You guys have social media, Discord?
We do tier social media releases when we're close to being placed at retail. We don't want to be too far in advance because then people get their hopes up, and we don't want anybody being disappointed, getting excited about a product and not being able to find it. We essentially will have started to preview our next year's stuff at some of the trade events, some of the toy trade events, and then we'll do an official launch. As we come closer to the end of the year, we'll put out our new catalog. And at that point, even though it's intended for trade, it sort of gets into people's hands and everybody knows what we're up to.